have quite this much of a crowd, so I'm very excited. And yeah, shout out to Janelle for helping facilitate this, and I'm incredibly excited to present like the more frequently asked questions that we get at the planning counter. My name is Katie Syme. I'm the Development Services Technician here at the City of Yucaipa. These are my colleagues, Christian Farmer, our Associate Planner, and Ben Matlock, Deputy Director of Community Services and City Planner.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming out. We all love talking about planning and development and all the different stuff, and so excited to have you guys here and kind of help you guys work with your guys' clients and everyone be successful and yeah, provide good service to the community. So.
And what I'll be doing is repeating back question, or I guess I would like it to kind of be an open roundtable discussion where I do have a tendency to basically feel free to interrupt. I want this to be something where you can ask free-flowing questions as we move throughout the presentation. That being said, I'll have to repeat your questions into the microphone, so it'll sound a little strange, but hoping that we can, have an open discussion. And then with that being said, I know that we have a lot of experience with selling property, but what's our experience level with development or construction projects and things like that? What's pretty entry level or? Perfect. So that's kind of the knowledge gap that we're hoping to fill today is what happens after the sale of a property and what can be feasible on a property and what are the components that go into that. So that being said, we're just gonna jump right in and I'm gonna show you some online tools that we have. I know that we have a lot of resources available, but I think a lot of it is finding them. And what you'll see in the back there as well, I have my business card, but with that we have a QR code that takes us to this site. This is the Planning Division's webpage, in which we have a lot of resources for folks who do have entry-level experience. So it's meant to reach a wide audience. And that being said, it's going to be at yucaipa.gov/planning. So if you need to write that down, by all means. And there's a few things here that are incredibly helpful if you're just getting familiar with this. And I think what we'll do, let's start off with the very bottom. So we're at yucaipa.gov/planning. And there's something here called Yucaipa Planning Projects Update. So what will happen is we'll get inquiries at the counter where folks want to know what projects have been proposed or approved in their area that would maybe influence where they choose to purchase property in Yucaipa. So if you're a little tech savvy, this will definitely help inform your search for properties in the area. There's this tab right here, which is for commercial projects. So for example, let's look at this area off of Oak Glen Road. So you can see off of Oak Glen Road and the highway, there's a few projects that have been proposed here. I can click on one, see that it was approved. It's the one listed first here. And then I can even click more info. And with more info, you can see off of Oak Glen Road, there's something called the Yucaipa Gateway Project that was approved. And there's a description here. And then there's even a portion of the plans attached here. So you can get a lot of information about ongoing projects in the city of Yucaipa through this tool. I think that this would be the most important tab for you, but if you want to look into more residential projects, like let's say maybe a multifamily project or condominium project, that would be included here. There's also more minor projects, like, for example, a steel RV carport. That's going to be listed under the residential tab. And if you would like to look up a specific address, and just remember you need to toggle between these two tabs, you can look it up right here. So let's just look up Green Bluff Way. So you can see if there's been any approved projects in the vicinity by typing in the address right there. So this is my one of my favorite tools. We update it pretty regularly. There's another tool that I find to be very helpful, which is our frequently asked questions page. And this is going to inform, I guess, the next tool that I show you. So it's a great cheat sheet. I'd say for your purposes, I get a lot of general zoning questions and animal raising questions. So these are the most frequently asked questions that I get at the counter. So this describes, like, how can I find the zoning of my property, shows you where you can find our general land use designation map. It also shows you like some keywords or key interpretations for like minimum lot sizes. And I'll show you a little bit more about why this matters in a moment. It has, I know that everyone picked up one of these when they came in, but there's also this ADU brochure with a lot of good key information about ADUs within the city of Yucaipa. Each municipality has their own set of standards around this, so it's definitely helpful information to have. And then we also have something included called a site plan example, which folks also picked up. It's going to look something like this. And site plans like this are incredibly helpful as we get farther along in the planning process. And then there's this entitlement brochure. And again, I'm lightly touching on these because I'll describe them a little bit more in more detail. But this shows the planning permit review process. So love that frequently asked questions page. You're always welcome to contact me or any members of our team directly, but this can serve you at like 12 o'clock at night. You're relaxed at home, working way too hard. And this can help get the information to you in a timely manner.
And if I may kind of add to Katie's kind of thing, especially on your guys' role as realtors, we do get a lot of kind of property owners that are looking to do stuff on an interested piece of property. Hey, I'm looking at maybe doing an ADU, or can I have animals, or I'm buying a piece of vacant land, maybe commercial, want to know what I can do with it. And so we try to have a lot of these resources so that it's easy for you guys and members of the public to have kind of a one-stop, easy reference. And so they're not going to necessarily have all the answers immediately, but get some right into the right direction, and then we can kind of go from there and making sure that it's all accessible. And then one of the other things that we do have, since we do have a Spanish-speaking population, is we have all the information also in Spanish too for easy reference.
That is a great point, Ben. And we also, I want to include this most commonly asked question here, which is, can I have horses on my property? The long and short of it is yes, if it's 20,000 square foot minimum. And then each horse would cost essentially 10,000 square feet. So 20,000 square feet minimum, and then 10,000 square feet per horse. And then you can refer to that in writing here. And so if you don't take great notes today, you can always shoot me an email, or you can navigate to this. That's a great question. So, and what was your name? Lori asked us if the 20,000 square feet referred to the entire property or the amount of open space on the property. And it refers to the entire property. I could get into animal code a little bit more, talking about accessory structures and things like that, but maybe if you remind me, we can get into that at the Q&A portion at the end. So yeah, great tool. And with this was actually one of my favorite tools prior to working at the city of Yucaipa. I came across this, and I found it fairly user-friendly. and wanted to introduce you to something called our zoning map. So our zoning map shows us, basically in 2016, we have a general plan, which shows us how we want the city's community goals and directions to take place. So it shows us our zoning. And you can pull up a legend here, right here in the upper right-hand corner, to indicate the land uses associated with big swaths of land, or you can look up individual properties. So I'm gonna just shoot. That's a great question. So somebody asked, how did I get here? So I'm gonna go back a little bit to our yucaipa.gov/planning webpage, and we're looking at our zoning map. So we went from frequently asked questions here, and then moved over to our zoning map right here. And that opened this webpage. So let's just look up, again, just Green Bluff Way. I don't know if that's a great example, but let's say I want to look at this corner property. So you can look up the legend if you want to look up like general zoning areas, but what I find to be very helpful is looking up specific properties. So you would look up specific properties using the address search bar in the upper right-hand corner, and then you would click on the individual parcel, and then it shows us all of this information. This is when I get so excited, because not only does it show us the APN number, the year the structures were built, the acreage, it also shows us the zoning. So it's not necessarily required that you pull up the legend. It may be helpful because you'll see it listed right here as well. This is something called planned development. It just means it has specific development standards. But if you were looking for, let's say, if something was commercial versus residential, it'll be listed right here. And then this one's gonna be listed as multi-residential. So right off the bat, it gives you a lot of information very quickly. So again, we're always available to help you at the planning counter, but this is in case you're looking up something on the weekend, we're not available, it's time sensitive. This is a great resource to determine what are the permitted uses with the property. The other thing that I find to be very helpful is there's also a link to county assessors information. So you can click on this link right here. It takes us to the property assessor's site. And what I find to be most helpful is over here at characteristics. I can do a deep dive on this, but what might be more helpful is if you find this interesting, we can go into depth with it at the very end. If you write it down and ask me at the very end, we can kind of unpack it. But I'm sure, like, how many folks are familiar with PIMS, a Property Information Management System through the county? Okay, I might. Okay, all right, we're not saving this for the end. So this is a great tool to determine square footage, maybe what the counties use code for it, which is, I would say, refer to our zoning before you do this, but it shows you, I think what would be most helpful for you is the square footage. So let me pull up a different property. Yeah.
So just a quick word of caution, that is the county assessor's page. So not necessarily what's been permitted, but what's been assessed at that property. So just because it exists doesn't mean that it's been permitted, and that's a big word of caution. Sometimes you'll see, SFR2 on that, saying that there's 2 homes there. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes what'll happen is, they go and they tax you for what they see on the property.
Yeah,
so
but
just a word of caution on that.
yeah, always, if something looks suspicious, it's always worth the due diligence. But it is like some of the information through like the MLS is tied into that system too. So it's kind of where some of that source data all kind of comes through. And so this is kind of the background of where that comes from. MLS ties into that system as well. So
What's MLS, Ben?
It's the system that they use as realtors for a lot of the property details.
Perfect.
And so all dovetails together. And so it's just kind of a helpful resource to try to see where some of that information is housed on the back end. And then we use this information to help us as well. And then certainly, as Maddie was showing on the general plan, there's a lot of information there too, including what schools the kids would go to, as well as what voting district they're in. So we try to have as much information that if people are interested, they can figure it out. If there's hazards, floodways, they can figure that stuff out too. Before some of the disclosures that you guys do as well, they can figure that stuff out early in the process too.
Notice you guys have utilities also listed, so that's helpful with water stocks.
Yep.
So I'm going to repeat that. Yeah, we do also have utilities listed, so that would help with water stocks. Yes, knowing if the property has water stocks, although I always recommend that you consult with the water provider or utility providers directly. Although this is a great summary page for that information. So we'll go into PIMS really quickly, but a lot of this information that we see here that's summarized is pulled from the San Bernardino County Property Information Management site. It is a mouthful, but, and then if I look at the land characteristics or the single family residence characteristics down here, it'll show me the size, if there was an addition and the square footage of that, if there's a porch. And again, to reflect what Christian said earlier, it doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not it's been permitted. And I'll go into how we can do a very quick and a very in-depth permit history check later. But this will show what it's been assessed as. And then if you are curious about specific development standards, and again, this is kind of more for a designer if they were looking to build on the home. But let's say you're like me and you like doing deep dives on things that may not be your main line of work, but you can look at the zoning standards here. They're linked here so you can see. I'm going very quickly, but you can see that there are setbacks and what those setbacks are. You can check that piece of information. And then to touch on one last piece of information, you can use these layers on the left-hand side to really help inform your search. So as Ben described, there's our floodplain safety overlay, so we can look at flood zones in the area. It's incredibly helpful. I'm actually going to untoggle our zoning layer or our land use layer so I can see this a little bit better. But yeah, you can see how there are entire stretches of areas where flood zones and floodplains have been identified. This helps for fire safety overlay. I know we get a lot of inquiries about fire insurance. Again, not necessarily my subject matter expertise, but this would definitely influence my purchase of a home, if only. And then I would look at, again, by clicking specific areas, you can see if it's within our fire. You basically can use this tool to go as deep as you want to go. And if you ever find that the functionality isn't working for you, or you're not getting the information that you want from it, or it's a little bit confusing, I am so ready to help you at any point in the process. So I'm going to navigate.
So the floodway designation, that comes from FEMA. The fire designation, that might be slightly different than what an insurance provider uses. So just because it says FR1, FR2 here, they may be using a different system of grading an area, but it's a good place to start.
Yes, and an audience member, what was your name? Danny said that, yeah, it changes a lot if a property is located within a fire safety review area 1 or 2. So we've basically provided enough information to get us like very quick information on a property, but we always recommend that folks do their due diligence, and we'll go into kind of those more deeper investigation efforts.
One thing I did want to just kind of highlight, not really related to this, but one thing that the city is working on We're not able to apply for it. It goes through like every 2 years you can apply, and so we've been prepping ourselves for the next cycle. Is kind of like a Firewise community kind of thing, where it's a citywide kind of designation to help reduce some of the fire insurance rates. We recently adopted an update to our general plan safety element. Provisions like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with our wine country specific plan, it included some additional fire safety provisions. And so all these little pieces that we've been adding in are to help essentially get us to qualify for that. And so the goal is being that once we're able to apply, we're able to get a reduction for the fire insurance, because it certainly is a problem. It's not something that we collectively can control here. Certainly insurance, I think across the nation is very expensive, depending on what state you're in. You know, they're running into different issues. But we're definitely trying to make sure that we're proactive to help provide as much relief as we can with the control that we do. And so we're definitely working on that. So just something to keep in mind, that we are as an organization trying to help provide that, whatever we can in place in city code to provide opportunities for that relief too. So just something to keep in mind.
And Ben mentioned a few things in passing that I think are worth noting. So I mentioned how this map reflects our general zoning, right, from our general plan established in 2016. But there are more specific plans, for example, the wine country specific plan, that aren't always reflected here. But if you go down to, like, there's a custom home overlay, there are some areas with more specific standards. So there's our general zoning and then very specific plans in the area. I think the Uptown specific plan is worth noting because there's mixed use permitted in some of those areas. But that is just yet another toggle on the slew of information on the left-hand side of the screen. So
It looks like there's a ton. There's a lot of what's in there is just our mobile home parks that are overlain with an overlay. So you're seeing a ton there. There's a lot less than there looks like.
perfect. And yes, we do have more mobile home communities than most. So it's interesting to see it reflected here. So that being said, let's move on to our second online tool, unless, did we have any other questions about this one?
Does it reflect what properties are on septic?
That is a great question. So what was your name? Holly asked us if this reflects if the properties are on septic or not. So long and short of it, no. That is information that we would have to obtain from Yucaipa Valley Water District. And that's a great due diligence effort that I'll go into a little more detail about what that looks like. But yeah, contacting the utility providers for where exactly utilities are located is the best route to finding that information.
There's been a bond on a property. Do we have a resource from the city to show if there's any outstanding balance on a specific bond on a property?
So Holly asked if there was any way to see if there was a bond on the property via this public-facing resource. No. Outstanding permits. I will get to that. There is a way to do a public records search. So that's what I'm going to show you in our next tool. Great transition, Holly. We're going to go into something called our Yucaipa Permit Exchange. And I'm showing you the Google method first. What you'll just Google is Yucaipa Permit Exchange. And just click on the top result. And then there's a link here, there's a link here. You can click this big old logo here. But essentially it's going to take us to our new online Yucaipa Permit Exchange. I am a big fan of this tool. Again, a lot of these things are questions that we field at the counter all the time, so having a remote resource really helps. And let's answer Holly's questions about public records that are available with a property. So especially if there's already structures existing on a property, let's say it's not raw or undeveloped land, this is a great tool. So can somebody give me an address they feel comfortable looking up with this resource? City Hall? Okay, and then please remind me of what our address is. Okay. Okay, so the address is we'll just leave it out. So this is a sample address. We're gonna look for all the public information associated with this address. And this is all public record. So you can see right now the filter is for all, but you can filter the results according to permits that were pulled on the property, inspections associated with the property, and any code cases associated with the property. And if I was purchasing a home or a property, I would definitely make this my second stop after the zoning map to ensure that this will only, by the way, these will only result in let's look at permits instead of all, just so we're not getting too nosy here. But it's showing us that, there's an HVAC permit, there's a patio cover permit, there's an ADU. I just do want to note that this will only show more recent records. So if you want to do a deep dive on a property, particularly one with structures built prior to November of 1989, I would recommend the San Bernardino County assessors first, and they will give you the assessor's log associated with that property. And again, that doesn't necessarily indicate that it's been permitted, but it'll have the permit numbers listed on that assessor's log. And frankly, that assessor's log isn't the easiest thing to read if you're looking at it for the first time. But again, we're always available to review that with you at the counter should you have any questions about the history of a project or of a property. So that is a great tool for.
I have one question.
Oh, yes. Yes, so the question was if this tool is only for the city of Yucaipa, and yes, it is only for the city of Yucaipa and the public records associated with us. So let's go back to our homepage. So what we just did, and I'm going to highlight it again, is we're on the homepage and we looked at search public records. And then if you wanted to, let's look up our next tool, which is our fee estimator. This will come into play later on if somebody wants to apply for a permit. I often get the question, how much is this going to cost? And in summary, I really won't know until they can provide square footage, project scope, project location. It can vary so much. And while there's due diligence efforts that need to be performed outside of the context of the city, this is a great way to determine how much the building permit will cost, or if there's any planning permits. This can be a way to assess those fees prior to starting a project or even purchasing a property.
Yeah, so even let's say hypothetically you have a property that's listed, you guys catch something that is certainly maybe not done correctly, and you're kind of going, okay, how much is this gonna be to fix it? This can be a helpful resource to at least get the client into the ballpark of, okay, this is what's gonna be, and then if you're doing the negotiation through that sale of the property, then this can at least be a helpful tool to get a little bit closer, say, looking at the permit fees and the inspection, it's gonna be roughly this amount of money. In order to correct this, plus whatever thing was maybe not done to code, this is what we're gonna buffer in. At least is a helpful tool for your clients to buffer in and kind of estimate on that side.
And there's another way to estimate your fees, which frankly, I would do just because, again, I'm an efficiency nerd. I love doing things hopefully once. So when you do this, when you use the fee estimator tool, essentially it'll ask you questions about your project scope, project location, all the nitty gritty questions that you can also get by applying for and saving a draft of. And again, this is probably something more for your designer, your architect, somebody there to help your client. But certainly, it's not. I think entirely out of the wheelhouse of somebody who wants to just try it and see how the functionality of the system works. So let's say I wanted to apply for a patio cover. You can look at what that looks like. And again, it's always worth consulting us with the city about which permit would be triggered. We've done something with building permits where they're by project scope. So rather than looking at an entire property, let's say that you're like, oh, I want to do an ADU here, I want to do a swimming pool here, I want to do a patio here. So rather than one building permit for those 3 things, what we've done is we've separated it out by project scope for the building permits. If we were looking at something like land use, which is my division, then we would go into more of the entirety of what's being proposed on a property. That being said, I think it's worthwhile going into what the permit process looks like. So if I wanted to take a vacant parcel of land, let's say it's multifamily, like zoned as multifamily, I wanted to put, let's say, 16 units on it. I'd have to start with planning, and that's called a land use entitlement. So that's going to be my subject matter expertise, and also Christian's and Ben's and my colleagues, Maddie. So if you're looking at the actual construction of a property, let's say after you get the land use entitlement, you want to then build those 16 units, that's going to be a building permit. And that essentially describes the differences between planning, which is more zoning, architectural review, general development standards, versus building and safety. They deal with the actual construction of a project. We deal with the land use intensity of a parcel of land. Just want to make sure that I'm capturing everything I want to describe here. I'd say, does anybody have any questions about how that works, or Holly?
So let's go on that premise. So the difference between planning and permitting or building, should we say. So for instance, there's properties on Wildwood that are being sold as approved plan for 5 units, whatnot. So that just means that they've gotten past the entitlement process, but not necessarily begun the building process.
So Holly asked a great question, which is if a property is being advertised with approved plans, does that means that essentially they haven't started the building permit like what stage of the project process does that mean that they're in? So before I answer that one, yes, it means that their entitlement has been approved, but the building permit process may not have been started. And with that, I would add a little note of caution where you look at the documentation associated with that approved plan. Sometimes what can happen is the entitlement lasts for a period of 3 years and can be extended to 6 years. And then after that, they'll have to reapply as a new entitlement. So if you ask for documentation associated with that parcel map, that track map, whatever entitlement it is, just double check the expiration date and make sure that there's been an extension filed if there needs to be one. That's a little word of caution on that one. And that's a great point to, the other thing that I wanted to, any other questions on that before I move on to my next point? So the question was if there was a cost associated with the extension of those entitlements, and the answer is yes. Christian, do you remember how much offhand? Yeah.
It varies. In the extension, really is us looking at any building code updates that may impact kind of the development that needs to be incorporated. Just, I think as a high level to help, the planning entitlement is kind of the, what are we wanting to build on a piece of property? And then the building permit process is how are we going to build it? So the actual physical construction, we're going to have 2x4s running here, the foundation is going to be this, and it's all that stuff. And the land use entitlement is, depending on the nature of the project, is either approved at staff level, so myself being the approval authority. The planning commission is the most common one, usually it's kind of the standard tier. And then some, if it's a policy, changes by the city council. And then building permit process is all the departments review it, make sure that those codes are met. We're looking at it for, does it match what was, what they proposed? Are they still doing the same thing, or did they totally do a 180 and make it, a lot different? Building safety is looking at just building code stuff, fire access, and so that's a lot of kind of that. But yeah, one of the points for Katie is, if you do have something that is pre-entitled by that, make sure you have the documentation to make sure it was done, that it is a still approved project. And then certainly ask them if they did the entitlement. So normally we don't get into construction plans. It's assumed that whatever you build is going to meet building code and go through the permit process. Ask them if they've done those plans. If they have, then that gets you a jump start. If they haven't, you're going to have structural engineer and all that people to get into it. And so the entitlement itself can be an upfront cost, but usually the technical stuff is the more expensive part of the process. And so even if it's entitled, it may not be a big cost savings if you're going to have to do a lot more work on the back end to get there. So just something to help, especially with a client that's looking at something, figure out what's been done and then use that as a gauge for what the actual value is of an entitled piece of land, whether or not it's actually financially feasible, or if it seems more like if it seems like too good of a deal, then it probably is. And so it's always something to just keep in mind so that you can protect your client.
And we have a question.
Question on the fee estimator. I understand that if you do an ADU that's below 749 square feet, does that reflect that pricing in the fee estimator?
Yes, so the question was, in our fee estimator tool, if the development impact fee essentially waive for ADUs under 749 square feet, if that's reflected in the fee estimator. And yes, it is. So that's a great transition. Thank you so much, Linda. Great transition into the conversations about ADUs. And I did want to highlight this, which is that ADUs under 749 square feet of habitable space, so that wouldn't include any patios or other architectural features associated with that ADU, of habitable space, have a development impact fee waiver, essentially. It's one of the ways that we have implemented new housing within the city of Yucaipa, is by offering this, but it's only for ADUs under 749 square feet. If you're looking to do an addition of, let's say, even 10 square feet, those 10 square feet of a habitable square footage would incur something called development impact fees. And I'm going to go back to our handy tool over here, back to yucaipa.gov/planning. We have something that goes into development impact fees a little bit more. So development impact fees are something that's incurred by building new habitable space, ideally so the taxpayers don't have to take on the burden of new development. The idea is that the use of public infrastructure that new development requires, so like drainage, roads, fire services, things like that, they can be paid for with the development impact fees.
Yeah, so a big way to think of it and how our fee program is set up is the program was established in 1992, so it established what was the infrastructure we had in place, and then looked at what the general plan build out was and what pieces of infrastructure we needed to do to meet that future demand. And so it took whatever that project cost was, and essentially it divides it by now per square footage of potential future development, plus square footage for commercial development and industrial development. And so that way, as new infrastructure, so roads get widened, new drainage projects that address our growth at build out, it's all bore by the new development versus the existing taxpayers in the community. And so it's a big complicated process. We have our fee schedule, but there's a whole big table that I have all the construction projects in the city, the future development, the potential, the impacts, and so it all goes into this bid system for that. And so as new developments come in, we make sure that those get assessed on those respective projects.
Thank you so much for that, Ben. I'll go into fees and cost considerations later in more depth. Development impact fees are one of the fees that you should be aware of prior to starting any project. And with ADUs, basically we can have anywhere from 220 square feet to 1,200 square feet of an accessory dwelling unit or ADU on a property. ADU can be used interchangeably with like granny flat, small, tiny home. I've heard a lot of nomenclature associated with ADUs, but that's generally the term we use. And there are a few considerations with that, which is any ADU over 800 square feet is subject to a planning permit first, or that entitlement. So because we're increasing the intensity of a use associated with a property beyond, what's a normal single-family home, that's why ADUs over 800 square feet require an entitlement prior to that building permit.
Hey, Katie, what's the difference between an ADU and a guest house?
There are certain standards associated with an ADU that are required by our development code. So we require a kitchenette, we require a bedroom, there needs to be a paved walkway leading to the entrance, bathroom. There's certain considerations that we need to look at with ADUs versus guest homes.
The biggest factor is the ADU can be rented out for the resident. So the guest house is purely for the enjoyment of the primary occupant of the property, and then the ADUs can be rented out. A lot of times, especially what we've seen with applicants that they want to build a guest house, if it's a smaller size, most guest houses are like 400 square feet, like a garage type structure, is we'll direct them to do the ADU instead, just because while they may not want to rent it, it does add value on the back end for them. And so it's like, hey, it doesn't cost you, if it's less than the 750 square feet, the building permit cost is exactly the same either way. And so it's like, okay, at least you can build a little bit more equity on your property investment this way, and then you have the flexibility whether or not you do want to rent it out at a future date. And so we do try to help encourage that, just because you're going to pay the same amount of money and might as well have a little bit more equity on the back end for your investment.
How would we differentiate? If we were online, they say that they have an ADU and it appears to be what would be a guest house. How would we be able to differentiate what is actually on record?
So Holly asked us, how would we differentiate between a guest home and an ADU online? And then that's when I would refer, a lot of ADUs are in our recent records. So using our public records search on Yucaipa Permit Exchange is a great tool. ADUs are more prevalent from the last?
Yeah, 2016 is when the first ADU law came into effect with the state, and so it would be after that. If someone does have a guest house, because if it is less than 750 square feet, the process to do a building permit to convert it to an ADU is very easy as well. And essentially, we're just on check for the kitchen amenity, and we just flag it as that. So if someone does have it, it may be worth them just doing that quick conversion. We'll have the record officially on it, and then that way it can be officially rented out. But yeah, definitely a lot of cities have kind of pushed for these guest houses or even a lot of communities had like illegal ADUs anyways, and so it's kind of a way to kind of bridge them. Hey, rather than it being this illegal structure, we get credit for it because it's additional housing stock that we need to meet for state law requirements. It adds their value and it reduces the liability on those property owners. So definitely, if you see something like that, we're happy to help them get that corrected, and it's a pretty seamless process. So.
Yes, using our public records search to determine if it's an ADU, and if it was built prior to 2016, it might be worth doing that deeper dive with the assessor's log. And then we have another question here with, my apology, Linda?
Is there a penalty if there's an illegal ADU on there to bring that up to code or whatever?
So
Penalty on that too?
Linda asked us if there's a penalty if there's an unpermitted or illegal ADU constructed on a property. It's a difficult question to answer. If they're not in code, then we can proceed basically according to the timetable. And by the way, please interrupt me if I'm getting into basically, there's so much unpermitted construction, and we do have a way to get unpermitted construction permitted within the city of Yucaipa. So what Ben talked about was essentially, it's called an as-built building permit, where we look at the ADU or similar project on a property, like let's even say it's an as-built patio, and determine that it meets today's development standards, today's building and fire code, and then we can issue an as-built building permit. The difficulty with that is that if they're in code, they'll be having to do that process while they're in code. So it can present, frankly, stress for any property owner if they're in code. Generally, that's from a code complaint, because now they have to do that process, the building permit process, on a timeline set by our code officers. So that can be the difficulty with as-built building permits.
I would say, yeah, and the code enforcement side is just more they want to see progress. So if the person's responsive, then it's easy. If it was a illegal ADU, really the difficulty part will depend on whether or not the structure was designed for habitable living, so people being able to be in there, you know, as a room, so a guest house, versus, let's say, a garage or like a tack shed, where it wasn't necessarily meant for that. If it was designed for human habitation and just wasn't a rentable unit, then that process is easier. If it was something else, then depending on how it was constructed, we want to make sure at the end of the day that the structure is safe. And so whether or not it meets kind of building code stuff, that's where a little bit more investigation can come in. So, but we try to make the process as easy as we can either way. And so we do, even with the permit process, we do have, through our building safety, a site investigation, so they can go out and kind of look at it and go, hey, this looks like it's well constructed, so it's not going to be a risk issue. Or if it's something like, hey, this thing's about to fall apart and I don't know if I would want to put someone in here, they can at least identify that as well. We've seen kind of a wide gamut of different types of structures, but if it was designed for a room in the first place, that is a lot easier, and there's no penalties on that end. If it's something that wasn't, then the penalty is more just the corrective action to get it to where it is safe for people to be in. And at the end of the day, that's one thing that we care about, is that it's safe for people to live in.
And I think what Lyndon may have been asking as well, some other cities implement, essentially if you're in code enforcement, if you have an unpermitted structure, the cost to permit it essentially doubles. It's kind of a penalty for having unpermitted construction. We don't implement that for ADUs.
Great.
What about the garage conversion? So previously, I want to say 1989, required a two-car garage in the city, and then it changed when the ADU was now admissible. Is that going to become a factor in the future, that we're going to be required to have garages again on the property for those that have already converted and they don't have the space to
So the question from Holly was, what about garages converted to ADUs? Does that influence whether or not they're going to be required to have two-car garages elsewhere on the property later? How it works out right now, so let's say it's a permitted ADU. Permitted ADU garage conversions are the only way that for single-family residential homes, you can essentially not have a 2-car garage on the property. Because you've converted that to habitable space, that's the only exception to that 2-car garage requirement that we have in our development code.
I'm going to jump in really quickly just to kind of explain some of the nuance. It may seem like our code is contradictory with itself, and what a lot of that comes from is state mandates for additional housing. So we wouldn't allow you to convert your garage to turn it into an additional bedroom, but we would allow you to do that for an ADU because of state mandates. That's the same reason that we don't charge additional impact fees for ADUs below 750 square feet. Those are mandates from the state, and so that's going to be the same in almost any city that you guys do work in.
Uh,
Same premise, so if somebody has done an illegal conversion to what they determine as an ADU, that could be required by the city. It would be an application process to become permitted, or would it be required to bring it back to the 2-car garage?
So Holly asked a great question, which is if it's a unpermitted ADU garage conversion, would they be required to add that 2-car garage separately? And no, because if we're getting it permitted, again, the key word is permitted, and we're getting it permitted as an ADU, it meets our development standards, then, and building code, fire code, all those considerations, then we can allow them to essentially keep the ADU as habitable living space. And then to Christian's point, we couldn't do that with an addition. So I've had folks who tried to, like, I guess, convert their garage into a game room while not adding that secondary garage component. Because it's not, like, essentially streamlined by California state law, that would require the replacement of that 2-car garage. So it depends on the project scope.
One thing I do want to just kind of note as a separate thing, long term, the city is looking to develop kind of off-the-shelf ADU plans so that someone who wants to do it can have essentially plans kind of ready to go. And as part of that layout, we also do want to have kind of the option built in for them to have a garage built with that. So then that way, at least covered parking is provided. I like to park my cars in the garage. I imagine other people do too. And so, we want to provide that flexibility as well, just because it is a nice amenity to have. Not that everyone uses it for parking their cars, but definitely helps kind of reduce some of the clutter that would otherwise be on a lot. So
I noticed that a lot of cities already have that in works. They have off-the-shelf plans, because there's only so much you can do with an ADU. So what is your timeframe on that?
So the question was, what is the time frame on these pre-made plans for ADUs?
we don't have a set timeline right now. We're doing this as part of a kind of regional effort. So rather than us bearing the entire cost ourselves to do this, we're working with a number of other cities. And so it's not something that is at the top of the priority with a number of other requirements that we have to do, but we do want to do this and then make sure that we have some good, well-designed stuff so that reflects a lot of the architecture that the city of Yucaipa has, and then can really complement the housing stock that we have too.
Oh, really quick, what was your name one more time?
Nancy.
Nancy.
And typically, a garage may not meet building codes, correct?
So the question was if a garage meets building code. And again, that all comes down to when it was permitted. So if it was constructed, in 1970, it was built and permitted, then it was built to 1970s building code. So that's kind of an important component, is if you're ever, worried about if it is up to code, I always recommend, looping in or having a conversation with a building inspector, but also that building permit record search will definitely help you to determine if it adhered to code at one point. Yeah. And then Holly?
ADUs, okay, so single-family residence is allowed a singular ADU on the property, or can people put multiple ADUs on a lot?
Oh, Holly, you're my favorite question asker. This is so good. So Holly asked us, how many ADUs can we have on a single family property? The answer is one detached ADU, or the ADU can take several different forms, but basically one ADU. And then we can have one junior ADU. Yeah, so Christian asked me to pull up the pamphlet real quick. So you guys each have this brochure that we had available on the table in the back. So I'm going to go to frequently asked questions. I'm going to go to general zoning questions. And then that's where we have information about ADUs here, as well as this brochure. So if you'd like to provide this to your clients, this is where you can find that information. I tried to pull it up individually, Christian, prior to this. I don't know if it's going to do that, but I'll try to zoom in. But it is located here on the website. So there's two things, and we can see it here in the corner. My apologies for not having it pulled up in a different way, but there's an ADU and a junior ADU. Generally, I say one ADU because a junior ADU has a few components to it before we can allow it to be constructed on a property. So a junior ADU essentially needs to be converted from the existing single-family residence, so from the existing body of the home. And ADUs can be converted, they could be added, there's much more flexibility around that, but junior ADUs must be converted from the existing primary home. They also require owner occupancy. So if I was trying to purchase property as an income property and rent it out, but maybe not live on site, the junior ADU would not be a possibility for me. I would have to only do one ADU. The junior ADU also has a maximum square footage of 500 square feet. So with the square footage limitations, with the property owner living on site limitations, in addition to that conversion component, that can be a barrier for some people to add that junior ADU on the property. But let's say the property owner lives on site, they want to convert their garage, they're only looking to do 500 square feet max, then they could have that converted junior accessory dwelling unit in addition to having an ADU elsewhere on the property. So, question from?
May I inject just a little bit? I'm coming from the lending side of things, so just so you know that a junior and an ADU on a single-family residence is not financeable conventionally at this time.
Can you repeat that one more time?
That it's not financeable conventionally at this time. So Fannie and Freddie Mac do not allow a junior and an ADU. So if you're advising your clients of this, just be careful to know that this is not a financeable project. Most of the time, the contractors leave like an open door, so it looks like.
So that is news to me, and I love hearing that on your guys' side of things, which is, and I'm sorry, one more time. Nancy added that it's not feasible or it's not possible ever to get financing for ADUs and JADUs projects.
You can't have two, so they're working on that with.
Oh, you can't finance both. It has to be one or the other?
Right, you can only have one ADU per a single family unit.
So the financing so you can only finance for one accessory dwelling unit on a property, not two accessory dwelling units on a property. Okay.
Nancy, before you go, I'd like to connect with you.
Yeah, but yeah, and that's I'll kind of highlight the financing side, especially when it comes to actually a number of different projects and how all that stuff works in construction loans. There's a whole kind of different set of rules, and they don't always line up with what cities have to do, both in terms of at the state of California and also rules in other states too. And so there is kind of a disconnect. And so that is a good piece of advice is that if someone is looking to do a project and financing some of this stuff, not doing it cash, is they definitely do want to talk to a mortgage broker and financial, someone that's in that industry to know what some of those limitations are, because we're not going to know that stuff. It changes. Certainly the rules of how the financing works changes too. And so making sure that they're going in kind of eyes wide open, because we may allow certain things, per state law or per zoning code, but whether or not they're able to finance it if they're not doing cash or some other sort of loan, that could be a separate barrier that they'd want to know before they start investing money.
That's great. Do we have any last questions about ADUs before I move on to kind of Nancy's point of costs and considerations associated with a project? And what was your name? Donna.
My question is, if you're doing a garage conversion and a concrete was poured for a garage, is that concrete sufficient to turn into an ADU?
So the question is, if a garage is converted to an ADU, if there's concrete poured for a garage, not habitable space like an ADU, is that okay? And the answer is, I don't know. And that comes up in the building and safety permitting part of the process. So my subject matter expertise is in a different division. Any other last questions? Yes? No, I love them.
In some of the information that I've been reading, it says they allow 150 square feet for the egress or ingress coming into the house. Is that in, do you guys do that? And is that included with the 749 square feet?
So Linda's question is about 150 feet ingress and egress. Are you talking about the fire requirement?
So what she's talking about is for JADUs, there's the stipulation that it has to be converted from existing space. That's specifically for JADUs, and the 150 square feet for ingress egress is a part of that 500 square feet total.
Thank you so much, Christian, because I was going to talk about kind of our next component, which is project feasibility and fire access, and all these questions come up at that part of the process. So, and also just a quick time check. We are approximately at the 1 hour mark, so I'm happy to keep you. We're about to go into project feasibility, costs, and considerations. So if that's something that you don't have the time for, I want to let you know I'm not holding you hostage, but I'm about to go into a little bit more details about the nitty-gritty parts of the project and how it can influence your clients' buying decisions and their budgeting. So I'm going to pull up my cheat sheet here. What can happen in, let's say, an unpermitted ADU conversion? So let's say there's an unpermitted ADU conversion on a property, but they're on septic. That can be a difficulty because essentially there's more jurisdictions involved in that part of the process than just the city of Yucaipa. So I just want to say, it's not fairly streamlined with the requirements that we're now holding it up to. Like, we want to make sure it's up to code. We want to make sure all the connections are permitted and things like that. And that's a big consideration. Did we have a question? Oh, okay. So with that, wastewater is a primary concern. I would say trying to contact the Yucaipa Valley Water District for all wastewater questions is recommended. And then if you find that there are no sewer connections to that property already, then you'll have to contact the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board for if new septic or expanded septic can be added to a property. And the reason why I highlight this is because not only do you have to go through the Santa Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board, but San Bernardino County Environmental Health, and they have their own requirements separate from the city. So this can essentially make or break a project in and of itself. And I really want to highlight it. A lot of these things can either change a project scope from from a couple $1,000s to thousands of dollars if they'll be required to connect to sewer or things like that. So making sure that you know if a property is on septic or sewer is one of the number one questions I ask people, especially if the buyers are interested in adding an ADU on the property. The other consideration would be fire access. So if they want to do a new build on undeveloped land or raw land, there are a few considerations that come up. This could be street improvements, fire access, utility undergrounding. There's quite a few things that come up when we develop raw land. So knowing what those requirements are on the front end can really help, because another one of the primary questions I get at the counter is folks who see a very affordable parcel and they're looking to purchase that raw or undeveloped piece of land and then put a manufactured or prefabricated home on it. There are a few considerations with manufactured or prefabricated homes. It needs to have a permanent foundation, permanent utility connections. The home itself needs to adhere to California building code and our development standards, and it cannot be older than 10 years old. And with that being said, the building permit process for the home it would be subject to the building permit just like any other home would. And what can happen is they'll show me a remote parcel kind of up in the hills and say, well, what about this one? Can I just put my manufactured home on this parcel of land? And the answer is yes, but we should be aware of, what are the costs of creating fire access to that home? You'll have to pave all the way leading up to where your home is going to be proposed within 150 linear feet of, actually, don't quote me on this, talk to fire, but you'll need to get it really close to all of your proposed structures on the property. And there will also be utility connections that are involved, and if there's existing utilities overhead, they may need to be undergrounded. Talk to engineering. And with street improvements, sometimes street improvements mean that we need to put in curb and gutter.
Sometimes sidewalk.
Sometimes sidewalk.
And different properties have kind of different levels of design, but one of the questions that we do get every once in a while is someone will find a really cheap piece of property, very large, but it's like in the middle of Pisgah Peak or something like that, where you ask the person, like they're calling, they just see on MLS listing or Zillow or something like that, and they go, I want to build here. And it's like, how do you get to that house? Like, and so it's fundamental questions where if you're not even looking at that, you start to then realize that complicated, some of these properties you have to go through other people's properties to even get there. Two, there's no utilities, so there's no fire hydrants, there's no water, there's no sewer, there's nothing. You're going to do a bunch of grading. There may be protected habitat or oak trees, or it's like, start thinking about, okay, this property may be just really cheap because until everything else happens around it, nothing's going to happen because you're going to spend a fortune doing it. Some people do have more money than sense, and God bless them on doing the project they want to do, but sometimes it's just, it can be a little bit overwhelming, and so we do try to help with those considerations. Is you want to look at kind of the fundamentals. How do I get to the property? How do I get water? How does a fire, if something happens, how do I get protected? All these little things really do come into the big picture of, the feasibility, especially with raw land. And some of the properties that we do get questions on every once in a while, there's a few, definitely up, the kind of in Wildwood and Oakland Road, kind of that far east end past the state park, where you're like, yeah, these are not easy pieces of property to develop in. So, definitely keeping that stuff in mind is always very helpful. So
Right. And then the cost of the permits, the cost of the actual labor and materials associated with making those improvements, creating that fire access, adding a hydrant if there's not one within 400 to 600 feet of the proposed structure, that can, again, increase your project costs from, like, let's say, $20,000 to like several thousands of dollars, and that's outside of the city's like that's all done through the utility providers. Yucaipa Valley Water District would be the person who you would consult with on the hydrant cost, but that can essentially, again, make or break a project for your client. And then, Holly, did you have a question for me?
Really quick, I see a couple people filing out. Before you leave, if you're ever talking to someone about a raw piece of property, please, please, please start talking to your utility providers as soon as possible, especially Edison, because the lead up time for that is extremely long. So the sooner you get to work on that, the sooner they can actually start their project.
So on that same premise, we're talking about a permanent, you said utility service, you said permanent foundation, permanent utility. Okay, so if a property does not have electricity close by and their intentions are to do solar, is that considered permanent?
So the question was if solar is a suitable utility connection to be considered as permanent utility connections for a home. The answer is no. It needs to be on the grid, yes. Yeah.
That's not us either. That's SoCal Edison.
And then any other questions? Okay, perfect. So going into the city fees versus the utility company fees versus, like, I guess all the other considerations that can come up on a property. So the city fee, and this is all separate from labor and materials in general, so we have permits that are required for, again, we're using the example of raw or undeveloped land. There's so many components with developing that, including the utility connections, including the foundation, but also including grading. So if you want to grade that property, that's going to be a permit. If you're working within the public right-of-way, like within the street or sidewalk in any capacity, that's going to be a permit. If you're doing something that would require a planning permit, that's going to be an additional cost. So that's why I always recommend, please consult with us at the counter once they have a good idea of what they want to do with a property, so we can kind of identify those costs for them at the front end. There's also solar that can come up with new development, solar requirement, landscaping requirements, and those are all permits that need to be completed and issued by the city, and that can push a project cost up. The required improvements portion that we talked about, street improvements, utility undergrounding, paved access, hydrants, those separate from the permitting cost, the cost of actually implementing those, right? Doing the concrete or the flat work associated with paved access should be considered in a project cost. So that way when people are trying to get financing, they don't end up over budget and then kind of in a bind for what their proposed project is. There's also that development impact fees portion that we discussed, and that is for any habitable square footage, so a garage, a patio, architectural additions like that. Those would not be applicable to development impact fees specifically. However, they would be subject to building permit fees. So that's just all the city fees. And then utility fees and school fees are all outside of the city's purview, but we still require them to be paid prior to permit issuance. So the school fees, we ask that people consult with Yucaipa Calamasa Joint Unified School District. And for the utility fees, we ask that folks reach out to the utility providers, so Southern California Edison, SoCal Gas, the different water providers, Western Heights, Yucaipa Valley Water District, and
South Mesa.
South
Water
Mesa. And we actually have a layer on our map that actually can show you who serves the property. So kind of going back into this a little bit, I'm toggling some things here. So you can see here that if I click, I toggled this water service button, and then I clicked on an individual property, and then you can actually click on this dialog box. Can everyone see this? So there's this little arrow on the upper right-hand corner of the dialog box when you click a property. That'll show you more information. So it shows you the multi-residential, but I'm trying to find the water service, and it'll show you that this property is served by Yucaipa Valley Water District. So I think that's great to know just offhand who you need to contact for updated utility connection information. Going back, basically the best way to get an estimate is using our fee estimator tool definitely helps. But if you ever want to consult with us at the counter, I recommend that folks use something called a site plan. I'll pull it up here, and we have passed it out as well. This site plan essentially informs us at the city of what your project scope is, what your square footage is, the location. And again, this can be drawn on a napkin. It doesn't have to be quite as comprehensive as we have here. What it does is give us concrete information at the city, at the counter, so we can provide concrete information in turn. Otherwise, we're dealing with, frankly, so many, as you can see, so many variables as part of a project that it'll be difficult to really pin down exactly what can come up. So by providing us this site plan, it gives us kind of better footing to provide better feedback. Yeah, so is there any questions about any of that? Holly, what do we got?
Anywhere in the city of Yucaipa, are there wells? Do we have a water table that can tap into a well on any property?
So that was a great question, Holly, is if there are well connections, if that's, I will say, again, outside of my purview, that's more building and safety, but I can say that she's one of our building permit specialists. She's done like one well connection property. Yeah, there's a lot of considerations outside of the Yucaipa scope.
Some things for water rights is its own very complicated issue that I'm glad I'm not in that industry because it'd be way outside my wheelhouse. Certainly having the water share rights for that, being able to do that. I mean, there's a whole lot to it. If you're within the connection, within the service area of Yucaipa Valley Water District, they're probably not going to let you do a well anyways. But yeah, definitely that's something that they should explore. We'll issue a permit for the well, but we'll make sure that all the documentation that allows that to be legally done is there, and then whatever the acre feet that you're allowed to pump from that well is maintained as well. That's whether or not you're able to do that on a piece of property, that's a different thing. And then certainly disclosures. I know one of the weird people that read all my paperwork when I've bought my houses, and so I know I've signed disclosures. I live in Chapman Heights, and so any mineral rights that are on my property above and below, I don't get access to them. They stay with the original property owners, which was the Chapman family. So yeah, I actually did read those, and so some of the other properties may have that as well.
And we have a question.
Well, being entitled, they ask us always to look and search for mineral and water rights, and we do not do that. There is companies that you hire that do the examination and the searching of who the ownership is for either mineral or water.
And what was your name one more time?
I'm Danny.
Danny. So Danny made a great point in which basically realtors aren't in charge of doing the research about mineral or water rights, and there are specific companies who do that work. So that's a Danny also added that it's very expensive, but it's outside of their purview, their subject matter expertise. Are there any? Oh, and then something I wanted very quickly before I answer your question is that Ben kind of clarified there's a difference between wastewater and water service. So in some areas of the city, this may take place where there's Yucaipa Valley Water District who handles the wastewater, but say Western Heights that handles the actual water connections to a property. So that is where our water map comes in handy. It tells you who the water provider is, not necessarily the wastewater provider. And then that's when you have to reach out to Yucaipa Valley Water District.
So Yucaipa Valley Water District serves their local agency formation commission organization, or LAFCO. Boundary is all of Yucaipa for wastewater. They may not have connections, and so that's where you have septic tanks. But yeah, they provide the wastewater throughout the city, and then we have the other companies that provide water. And so it is interesting when you have your sewer bill with Yucaipa Valley Water District and a Western Heights, a water company thing. And we actually have some vacant land where you have a property owner where part of their property is owned or in the jurisdiction of Western Heights and Yucaipa Valley Water District for water, and then the sewer is all of them. And so that's, whenever they develop, that will be an interesting process that they'll work with. For those utility companies, we have no on the front, involvement on there, but just, sometimes it's its own separate process, and we just make sure that you guys have complied with the requirements, and that's really all we're looking for. So,
And then question in the back. So the question was, do all septic tanks have leach pits? So there's seepage pits and then there's leach fields, from what I understand. And the answer is no. New septic, and again, I have to say as a disclaimer, not my wheelhouse, but enough to be dangerous. So definitely consult with our building and safety team if you want more information about this. But leach fields are generally required versus seepage pits for new septic. But again, it's whether or not that's even going to be approved by saying and a regional water quality control board. There are entire areas that aren't permitted to have new septic according to them, and there are acreage constraints as well. Like if it's under a certain acreage, they won't allow new septic or expanded septic. So again, outside of my wheelhouse, but yeah, if anyone wants to add anything.
Yeah, so Katie's correct. The leach lines are the preferred way for septic systems to be implemented. I think seepage pits are only in certain cases where they require an exception. As Katie was kind of touching on earlier, the septic issue can be a pretty large kind of stopping point for a lot of projects, especially if they're trying to add multiple units onto a single parcel. Some things that can be added in order to get an exception may be kind of additional treatment facilities on the septic system, and those can be like tens of thousands of dollars, so it can be very, very expensive.
The question was, can we build on top of those? No. If you did want to decommission a septic tank, and again, please consult with our building and safety team. From what I understand, it needs to be backfilled to certain standards, like up to 90% compaction. And there's a very specific metric for what you need to do to decommission or fill in any, frankly, like hole to then build on top of. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Holly, what do we got? No, it's totally. I'm addicted to questions, so I love it.
He's our best student. Since you are planning, and I know you had said septic is building and safety, is there anything in the plans for having what we have presently not on sewer to get sewer futuristically for any bond or anything like that? Is there something in the plan or that we can expect, or Yucaipa, certain areas that are not on septic?
So,
Wait, so the question was, in our plan,
is there plans for extending sewer lines to areas that are underserved? And the answer is kind of a yes and no. In large part, yes, the Yucaipa Valley Water District is looking to expand their sewer line service and providing that. A lot of it comes with new development that comes in doing that extension. And so an example is some of the projects in Dunlap Acres, which has historically always been underserved. The water table is also very shallow, so septic tanks and having shallow water table is not necessarily a good thing for water quality, and so they definitely are trying to do that. So new development, they're bringing in the sewer lines, and then property owners are able then to connect. None of them are required to, but certainly if you do a new development, so let's say you have one house, you decide I'm going to do a subdivision, then all of those houses then get connected onto that sewer line, and kind of through that process, we added in. So Dunlap Acres is a big example where you've been seeing a lot of new water lines. The Artisan condominium project brought down some additional water lines, and then there's another project nearby that's further extended. And then the Wine Country specific plan, for example, for the North Bench would extend the sewer line through that entire area, and a lot of water infrastructure to boost up water pressure and total capacity in that area as well. So certainly we work with the water district on kind of what our long-term plans are, where we see growth happening, to make sure that they're designing stuff in, and we try to make sure that we're very collaborative on our environment, so then that way they're able to serve their customers effectively, and we're able to make sure that all the projects flow together as efficiently as we can. Given that we are separate organizations, we want to make sure that all the puzzle pieces line up together, and so we do meet with them rather frequently just to make sure all that stuff, even utility projects, if they're doing new water line replacements, let's say we're going to be repaving a new street, we know they're going to be coming in, we'll hold off on doing that repaving so that we're not having them tear up the brand new street we just put in. And so we try to make sure that to the extent we can, we're all working together, because yeah, we want to make sure that we're serving our residents and community the best we can.
Is that also on that same note, is it possible that the cost for those who have been in those communities that are underserved with these new development and having these building and the water lines and the sewer lines run, is the cost going to be
So,
development of said land adjacent to those?
So Holly's asking, with these developments, with say the tract developments that we have, would it be cheaper for neighboring parcels to then connect to that now existing wastewater connection? And frankly, I would say yes, because frankly, you don't have to go as far. It's going to be closer to you. But with that, I kind of wanted to add, or
Yeah,
maybe let Ben cut in for a second.
I don't know if the water district has a discount rate provision for someone to connect, like a voluntary connection. I don't know if they have that in place. Since we wouldn't administer that program, we don't necessarily know if they do, but that's certainly a good question for them. It may be, yeah. it would be for
My
the water.
understanding is that new development is required to connect or to pay, even if it's on septic, pay a sewer connection fee. And so I would assume that that is budgeted in so that it'd be cheaper.
Yeah, but yeah, certainly call the water district. But certainly a very good question and something to explore, especially for those areas where they do have water, the sewer lines coming through. I remember as a kid, we had a septic tank, and you know, the joke is there's two types of septic tanks, one that's leaking and one that's going to leak. No, that's not actually the truth, but it certainly was when we sold our property when I was a little kid. That was like the biggest liability we had on that piece of property was the septic tank. So.
Are you guys allowing for installation of new septic or replacement of septic systems for existing septic tank holders if it's failing?
So Holly asked if we're allowing for new replacement of existing septic. That is a question for building and safety first, although it never hurts to contact the water board, just given that it's going to be, as of December 31st of this year, really outside of the city's purview. We're going to need their approval, both San Ana Regional Water Quality Control Board and San Bernardino County Environmental Health, before it even reaches our desk. So, but it's always worth consulting with our building official as well.
My understanding, at least I think from what I remember, is yes, as long as it's, you know, like for like replacement, then as long as it's taking something that's not working and putting something that is working, I think that my understanding is that that's been allowed. But
one more note, and then I'll get to your question. From what I remember, if you're within a certain linear feet of sewer, like let's say that you're like 100 feet from a sewer connection, Yucaipa Valley Water District may require that you connect to that versus being on septic. So again, please do consult with them if the property is on septic, you know, or would need to be. It's frankly always worth contacting the folks who would require that as part of new development.
and the people at Yucaipa Valley Water District are very nice, so they're all very fun to talk to. So.
And then, so your question?
So I just wanted to mention that I have been on the phone with both Christian and Katie several times, and very, very helpful, very informative. Katie sent me a slew of information on a project on 3rd Street, so we're still reviewing that, and probably start that project at the beginning of the year.
Perfect.
Very, very helpful, guys.
Wow, I'll repeat that back into the mic. Nancy said that both Christian and myself are very helpful with a slew of information. So yes, do always feel free to contact us directly. I'm going to pull up my contact information here. And so that way you can take a gander. I also have my cards available in the back. Wow, I love this for me. Okay. So I also have my contact information in the back, so you don't need to memorize this. And then those cards are helpful if you wanted that QR code as well. And I printed them myself, so pardon the rough cut. Do we have any other questions before we sign off for the day? Yeah.
Can I go back to ADUs? Linda had a two questions.
Okay.
One of them was, are there gonna be any changes, like financial changes from 2024 moving into 2025? Should she get started quicker, or can she hold out till next year? Will there be big changes?
So the question was, will there be financial updates between this year and next year associated with ADUs, or I'm going to include any building permit as a part of that? The answer is yes. We reassess our fee schedule annually. So with that, there's always going to be changes, and it happens every year.
Yeah, it may not necessarily be substantial changes. We are going through our our permit fee, what's referred to as our cost allocation plan, which is kind of the baseline of what the different staff members involved in projects are, confirming what those rates are. And then our development impact fee, we update annually as well, and that's usually based on construction cost index as well as any new estimates we have for projects. And so that one tends to change a little bit more as we get updated numbers on projects. We also, if we get grants, we use that to drop down the number. So we try to make sure that we have we're trying not to be so cost heavy. So we do try to stay cost competitive, but we also want to make sure that we're not overburdening or underfunding the program as well in that system. But yeah, we do try to evaluate it just to make sure that we don't have bid gaps where then we're playing a bid catch up later on, because we had done that a number of years where we hadn't updated our fees. I think prior to 2016 or 2017, we hadn't updated our fees for like 20 years, and the catch up for how much that costs then for the mid 90s and what it costs today was a pretty drastic change. And yeah, that was definitely not a fun experience for anyone that was involved, that either deals with construction. The elected city council also was not happy. It's like, we gotta make sure we do have cost recovery, but that was pretty rocky. So we've been trying to be much more consistent, so then that way that the fee changes are always just kind of maintained, but not drastic one way or another.
As a quick general rule as well, our city fees are typically in line or slightly lower than a lot of our surrounding cities. Two of the fees that are more expensive are the school fees as well as our water connection fees. So if you guys are curious about that at all for new construction, that is kind of a general rule.
And then to your second question?
Second question was, have you put in gas lines for our kitchen, or is it strictly electrical? Josh, you read it 1, 2, 40.
So the question was, can we use either gas or electrical for a new kitchen? I'm going to defer this to my colleagues because, again, it's more of a building and safety question for California Building Code. Maybe y'all might know more about that than I do.
My understanding was with the 2022 California Building Code update was that gas lines are still allowed, but they have to be essentially set up for electrical connection as well. So you could have electrical appliances or the gas, and so then that way, as the resident or consumer, you have the option either way for that. Certainly, yeah. So as far as I know, yeah, you do see new gas still with modern construction.
And then I thought I saw Holly's hand. Perfect.
Okay, so you said the ADUs, the developmental impact fees are waived up until 749 square feet? What was the reason?
That's exactly. Oh, so Holly asked to clarify if development impact fees are waived up to 749 or 800 square feet. So the answer is up to 749 square feet. So,
Is that something that's reevaluated annually as to, okay, somebody's projecting that maybe in the next year or 2 years, how long will that be waived?
so Holly asked, how long will that development impact fee waiver be in place for ADUs under 749 square feet?
Up until state law changes whatever that number is. They probably won't drop the square footage. Whether or not they raise it is another story. I don't know. There's certainly been a number of different kind of state laws kind of proposed that deal with the development impact fee law. It's all based on the original thing is through the Mitigation Fee Act. But there's also a number of other requirements that we do have to make sure that those fees are transparent and actually assessed appropriately. So I don't know if the state will ever modify that number or if it'll stay at 750, but right now, for the foreseeable future, it'll stay at 750. Or 749, 750 is the above is when those fees get triggered.
Ben and I went to a planning conference last month, and one of the things that they had mentioned was that there were like 400 laws that went through the state legislature that dealt directly with land use planning. So we're kind of constantly chasing our own tail a little bit, trying to make sure that our code is in line with what state law says. But it's constantly changing, and so I wouldn't be surprised if 6 years from now, a lot of what we're saying right now is going to be kind of outdated.
And then a clarification that I had to that point is with an ADU under 749 square feet, it's subject to just a building permit and it has that development impact fees waived. The 800 square foot threshold refers to when a planning permit or land use entitlement is required for that ADU. So, and then anything above 750 has development impact fees waived. So it's a lot of, like, frankly, if I was looking at it, I'd be confused. Okay, like what is triggered when? Always consult with us, or you can look at the brochure for reference, or a general rule of thumb is least amount of permitting, least amount of development impact fees, school fees would be with an ADU under 749 square feet, habitable space.
Yeah, we see a lot of ADUs like right at 749 square feet. That tends to be the magic number for a lot of people. Once they cross that, it's like 1,200 square feet for sure.
Oh, Holly, no,
So you had gone on the map and you were looking at permits and so forth, and fees and things like that. So here's my question. If somebody has done an addition and avoided the school bond tax, and so we're trying to find out, okay, can somebody do another addition to a potential property? Is there a resource through the permits department, resource on here so we can see how many additions have been put onto a home to see whether or not if somebody was going to do something futuristically and add an extra 100 square feet, it's going to bring them over that threshold so that they now have to pay for the bond tax and see whether.
So the question was if there's an additional, I'm sorry, I'm trying to repeat it back. So if there's another addition added to a property, how can you look at whether or not school,
Like a school bond requirements would kick in. We actually don't have probably that information. That'd probably be a good question with the school district on what it is. We just look for, when we go through the permit process, some sort of acknowledgement that either fees have been paid or that fees are not due for our process. We wouldn't necessarily have whatever their bond requirements are, or they also have the community facilities district. We don't necessarily implement that on our end just because it's outside of our agency.
But is there a way online so you can see on each individual parcel permits that have been pulled and additions that have been pulled on the property?
so Holly's asking if there is a way online to determine if there's been permits pulled, so, for a property, for those additions, for those, for construction associated with the property. Referring you back to Yucaipa Permit Exchange, and this won't really capture what you're talking about, school fees specifically. So that, again, going to defer to Yucaipa Calamasa School District. In regards to the permits, just a quick overview. This research public records thing will be great for determining what building permits have been pulled in recent years. If you need to do a deep dive beyond that, again, the assessor's log is a great source of information, consulting with them for any permits prior to 1990. And then between 1990 and 2007 is when you would have to do an official public records request through us. So this this public records search really works for anything after, I think, 2007. So it's more recent permits, but there's this window of time between November 1989 and, let's say, 2007-ish, where there's a different process where you'll have to Google Yucaipa public records request. And by the way, I have this information available as well. If you send me an email, I can send you links, I can send you the steps you would have to make to do this deep dive, but it's kind of interesting. So for more recent permits, dating back to 2007-ish, you can find it using our quick search tool. If you need to go between 1990 and beyond, and earlier, that would be a public records request through our document center.
And quickly, I want to note the reason why is our permit change was able to carry over our last permit software that we had for a long time. And so we were able to migrate a lot of that data in, as well as all the current information. But all the older permits from the mid-aughts and to city and corporation were on a totally different system. And so we just don't have those records where it could transfer over on the database. So that's why there's that gap, is we'd be doing years of data entry to try to bring it over, whereas the public records request for the specific permit's a lot faster for resources. So that's why there's a break on
Yeah,
on
between
that time.
1990 and 2007, those are archived and require the extensive public record search, where the quick search is probably more helpful for earlier construction if you need an immediate, like, I just want to assess this, I just want to look and see what has been done on this property in earlier years.
I want to add something really quick. The public records request is free, but it's a pain. So if it's more recent and you guys are thinking maybe, it's in the 2012-ish time, feel free to check first before you do it, because it takes a ton of staff time for us to do that. But we're more than happy to help if you guys do need to do the public records request. The other thing that I was going to add is school fees used to be triggered at 500 square feet. That number has been upped with the ADU number to now reflect 750 square feet as well.
Yes, to reaffirm what we're talking about and Christian's point, it did previously used to be a 500 square foot threshold, but due to ADUs predominantly being 749 square feet, that has recently changed. And then with the addendum, always check with the school district, but that's as of our knowledge as of today. And then Nancy, did you have a question for me? Oh, perfect. All right, so I am sweaty from how much information I've just provided you, but do we have any other questions? I'm more than happy. Oh, and then again, don't feel pressured